Hey guys, my name is xOctoManx and this is part 4 of my Chrono Trigger inventory tutorial series, which is Patreon supported, so feel free to donate into this one as well. In the last part we were creating the navigation in between the options panel and the inventory panel. We have decided to not go into the equipment panel now because the inventory currently is more important than the other stuff, but we will go over into this one later on as well. In this part we're gonna start to create the navigation back from the inventory panel to the options panel, and also we should be able to enable and disable the inventory on button press, or actually on key press or whatever as well. What we want to go in is we're gonna open our inventory manager, which is basically just doing all of that stuff inside the navigation for the moment, and we're gonna implement the going backwards when we are in the inventory panel and pressing a specific button actually. This also means we need to make sure that we are only in the inventory panel state at that point. And when we are later on in the state of use and order or even organize, we need to go and use other inputs, or actually the same inputs, but the way would be another one backwards. Okay, so where we are currently is in the inventory select. I'm gonna zoom in a bit so you might see stuff better. Which is when we are in the inventory panel state, we're gonna choose the inventory select at this case, and when we are pressing the A key, for example, we would be at the option 0 when we are not, and decrement the current option, of course, and same for the other side when we are going to clicking the key code.d, and we are not at the maximum of the list. We're gonna increment that to go with the finger to the right, and after that we're gonna set the horizontal finger to whatever the transforms position is. What we also want to do is we want to make sure that we can go back, as I already explained before. So we're gonna implement another if statement for input. In this case we need to make sure that this is going to be another key instead of the A or D key, but also not the Y key. I believe that's the one we just used in here. As you can see, when we are pressing the Y key we are going to the inventory panel state. What we want to do is we don't want to use a Y, but maybe the X key or something different to this one. So we only use basically 2 keys to say yes or no. In this case we say on get input get key down, open close parentheses, and inside we say key code .x, for example, or any other key code. Later on we might go in and use joystick or joypad inputs, but for now, well, just let it as it is. Yeah, when we are pressing the key code X, we want to leave that particular panel. There basically is nothing else than just going back to the other state, which means we're gonna go to the inventory state. This one is going to be equal to, and now we go to the state back to the options panel state, and that should be it. Since the options state once again is going to make sure that the horizontal finger is going to be deactivated, vertical finger of course is going to be activated, as well as all the panels are correctly set it up once we are going to this, as we already set those up. Don't forget to save, and let's go back to Unity and test out if that is working when we are inside the inventory panel, and of course in the inventory panel state. So now with A and D I still can go left and right. When I am on the inventory and press the Y key, for me I'm gonna be able to choose one of those options as we already have done before, but when I press X now, I am back into the inventory, or actually in the options panel, with the finger still on the inventory's option. That means the system now remembers that we have been in the inventory, and we can again go back, and also it's making sure that it is remembering where the finger has been the last time. For example, when we are going in and do the finger on this, go back and go in once again, you see it still remembers this one. What we could do is that every time we enter the inventory panel, we're gonna set the item to be 0 as well. I'm gonna copy the inventory current option in here and paste this one directly in here. It's going to be equal to 0, which means we can prevent the system to remember this one only when we are going back, but when we are later on in the use and or maybe in another, in the organized state, for example, then we don't need to remember that. Okay, so what do we need for an inventory is, well, at first a system which is handling all the items we are able to get, to list, to use, to remove. And I will go over, and I believe so, I will do that stuff directly inside of the options canvas as well. The other possibility would be doing this one directly in the inventory panel, even if I'm not 1% sure if I like to do it. But I want to make sure that I have this one as a child somewhere, or basically maybe a parent of the complete system for now. But let's create that stuff at first. So before we actually can create an inventory system, we need to determine or say what's a item. Since we are making use of items, items can have different states or stats. They can have armor if they are. They can have a specific type. They can have a name, an ID, and so on and so forth. But what can we use to make or create items? Maybe independently from any other system, but we are still able to catch the data somewhere, or put this maybe inside a list. And we're gonna use lists later on for a list for our inventory itself. But before we can actually populate a list, because we don't know the type, we're gonna need to take care of the type at first. In this case, we could create a new item class which has the properties we're gonna need. So let's do that at first. Go to your scripts folder, right click, create a new C# script, and call this one just item. This item is going to be any item you please and like, and we can fill in all the data we need. Instead of using mono behavior, we're gonna use a type scriptable object, which means we can fill in any data inside of that scriptable object, and we can create this at any time we like. So in this case, we're gonna have just an object which is holding all the informations about any item we want, and we only have those inside our assets folder. What we can do is we can later on go inside those items and read all the possibilities or all the items directly from this scriptable objects according to their name, for example. And we can read the data, we can use the data, and we can even go in and change data if we would like to. Every item, whatever kind of item it is, it could even be an enemy or something like that, or maybe a hero, will have some kind of name. So we're gonna choose public string name. Also, every item might have an integer, which is going to be the item ID. Later on, when we want to reference different item IDs, for example, if we are not taking the name directly from the scriptable object we're gonna create, then we can reference the item ID if we like to. So there are different possibilities we're gonna have to, or we can change according to whatever this item type is. Once again, an item will not just have a name and ID, but it will also maybe have some kind of type. So what type of item is this item we're gonna have? Let's assume we're gonna have some weapon, then it's going to be of type of weapon. If we're gonna have a potion, this is of course going to be something like a consumable type, or maybe a, yeah, whatever. In this case, to make use of different types but do not mix them with each other, we can create an enum for this. An enum is nothing else than a list or drop down menu we're gonna be able to use inside the item scriptable object class, in the item class, which we are able to manipulate to whatever we like and set, of course. So this scriptable object class item will have some types or item types. I'm gonna use a big T in this case, maybe types, and open close the curly braces, and inside we can say, okay, we're gonna have something maybe like a consumable. What we also might have is the usual ones, a weapon, a armor. We can also use shoes and stuff, whatever we please and like. We can have accessoire. I'm not 1% sure if that is written correctly. If not, well, you know how it's going to be written. And what else do we have? Maybe something different, maybe some non-usable and not consumable actually, or a consumable and a not consumable. So maybe something like a book which is only holding informations about some kind of riddle or something. So maybe we're gonna add this as a non-consumable or anything like that. So non-consumable. If I gonna go and have more types later on, we're gonna implement those. But basically that's everything. Also, there might be some things which are equipable and not equipable, but maybe we're gonna go and do that a bit later on. Since this is going to lean to the Crono trigger type, we're gonna have maybe later on another enum which is storing which item can be used by which, let's say, character in the game or hero. And we can later on, of course, compare the hero name, the original hero name, with that enum type. But beforehand, we want to make sure that we're gonna create another public, in this case types, and it's just going to represent the type. So that means we can drop or choose from that drop down list what kind of type the item is, of course what name it is has, and of course what item ID it has, and we're gonna need that to make sure that we have access to that drop down list, and we can later on compare it. Again, as I said before, we can use a public enum for the characters, or usable by characters or special characters or whatever. So used by, and this can be assumed, like for the equipments, for example. Then there might be only one particular choice. But if it is, for example, a consumable like a potion or something, everyone is able to take this and make use of it. In this case, it depends, of course, what do you want to use or usable. What do you want to make use of, and how you want to compare things with other things. In this case, you might want to go in and type in all character names in here. But the first one, of course, is going to be all, since all, sometimes all are able to use something, like the consumable one. The other case would be none, like which is a non-consumable, so nobody actually would be able to use it. Not sure if we're gonna need that state, because we're gonna have the item type state in this case. But to keep that simple, I would say we're gonna implement this for now. The next one might be our main hero, which is called Crono. The next one is going to be maybe Frog. So all your characters can land in here, all possible characters. And if we have a Siegfried, this guy can also be in here. Or if we have any lady like Luca from the original one, then can also say Luca is also one of the people or heroes which can use that. This is another public one of type usable by. I'm gonna just name this one use by. Okay. So this would be able, or would make sure that we are able to pass the data for every item which can be used by particular people, which is an accessory or a weapon and armor, consumable, non-consumable, or whatever. Can also more and more types in here. We're gonna later on choose in the drop-down list again what all that items are going to be about. Okay, so the next thing is we want to make sure that we are able to create new scriptable objects at any time. Of course, there will be more things we're gonna need to take in consideration later on for all the items. Oh, I forgot a pretty important one, which is going to be, of course, an icon. And the icon is going to be of type sprite. Now, since I already mentioned it, we might want to go in and fill in some base data directly inside our string item and icon. But what I also want to make sure is that I create a new public string of type item name, and instead of item name I just take name, as I already mentioned before, which might interfere otherwise with the already declared field type name, which is already used actually. So randomly, or actually we're gonna say the item type, the item ID is going to be set to be 0, and our icon is going to be set to be null when we are actually creating all the item types at first, and later on we are able to change those according to whatever. However, what we also want to do is we want to make sure that we are able to create those directly in the inspector, or it may be in Unity somewhere. So in square brackets we say create asset menu, and what we can do inside of that, we can declare how we want to create this. So at first we want to say we want to have a file name, which is already a string, and the file name is going to be equal to a string, of course, and the base one is going to be called new icon. What we also want to do is we want to create a menu name inside of that, so we know under what kind of menu are we gonna find our icon or our item, so we can actually create new scriptable objects using the usual menu in this case. So we say menu name is going to be equal to, and in string once again, inventory / item. So when we are calling this one, or with a big I maybe, so when we are calling this one, or actually when we are opening this one, we are able to go to or navigate to our own inventory systems menu and create an item with the name new icon, and not new icon but new item, and we are able to create new ones, rename them, and of course change all the values directly in here. Don't forget to save the script, and let's return to Unity. So when we are done with that, and the compiler is already done with all that stuff, you can see when we are selecting the items C# script, it already has an icon in here, but default references will only be applied in the edit mode. So what we can do now is we can go to this folder in here, or maybe into the hierarchy, right click, create inventory item. That means we can now create a new item of type scriptable object and make use of it. Usually we should be able to do that as well in the assets menu. So assets, create inventory item. Now we can name this. As you can see, it has the new item name as a default name, or we can maybe name this one as weapon or sword of something, or just a sword, like a basic one, sword of fire maybe, or fire sword. It doesn't really matter how you name it, but what you also want to make sure is that you can see on the right in the inspector that there is a name, the item name of Sword of Fire. You can again give it another or an extra name in here, but which usually should be the same name as the name is of the name in here. So Sword, you can fill in now the data and it will automatically be stored inside that scriptable object. So Sword of Fire has maybe the item ID of 1, and we can give it a sprite. We can say what kind of type it is. In this case, it's going to be a type weapon. We can also go and make this one a bit deeper, like it's what kind of weapon it is. And of course, it is usable by, and maybe let's say Crono is the one who is only be able to use the sword or the specific weapon type, for example. So he's only the only person who is able to use the Sword of Fire, for example. If you want to use Frog, or you want all can use that, like Crono, Frog, or Luca, then you can do so and implement this in this scriptable object as well. So when we are leaving this one and going and check this one out, as you can see, it is automatically stored inside that. We can actually, we don't need to do anything, since this is some kind of object. We can always go in, and of course, as you can see, it's of type asset in the very bottom in here. This will be accessible from any point, and it is of type item. The cool thing is now we can create an item list with several different items or different types of items, which we are able to read out, and all the data which we have inside that can be automatically placed in our item holders when we are creating those. So what I want you to do is create a new C# script, and we call this one just inventory, since this is going to be the real inventory now. This here, that was only the inventory manager, which is just managing the inputs. But what we want to have is the inventory for the player, which is actually holding all the informations, all the data about all the items we just have created. So let's open this one up in MonoDevelop or Visual Studio, whatever you please. And let's start to create some stuff in here. The first one you want to make sure is that you're gonna use the systems.collections.generic, since we want to use a list of type item, so we can actually call all the informations from that items and make use of it. Let's create this list. So it's a public list. In open close triangle brackets, it's going to be the type item, which is of type Scriptable Object. And I can just call this one inventory list or something. It's going to be equal to a new list of type item, open close parentheses, and close the line with a semicolon. Now this list can hold everything about item types. What we also want to do is we want to make sure that we have access to inventory from any point in the game. So we're gonna say this one is going to be a static class. And how do we say that? We say public static inventory, and it's going to be the name, it's going to be the instance. So we create an instance of type inventory, which is the same name as a class name, and make sure that this is going to be only this void awake open close parentheses, and inside the awake function, which is provided by MonoBehavior or is part of MonoBehavior. So in awake we're gonna say instance is going to be equal to this. Later on we're gonna design the singleton design pattern a bit more, so we're gonna make this one persistent through other scenes, but for now we just want to make sure that we have a static instance we can go into and change whatever we need and like. So what is our inventory basically about? It's nothing else than we want to add something inside of our inventory. We want to remove stuff from our inventory when we are actually using it. And we want to have some fixed informations about specific item types, for example, or, well, depending on what these items are actually about. For example, if we want to have a maximum amount, we're gonna need to implement this inside the inventory. Public int max amount. And the max amount is going to be equal, in Chrono Trigger it was 99. So maximum amount of 99 items can be in one slot, and there is no possibility to overdo it or have more than 99. Like we can only have 99 swords of destruction or sword of fire in this case, but not more. And we can do that with anything. Since this was only text, they would just be counted up automatically, depending on however we're gonna set all of that stuff up. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to have I'm going to use a list because it's dynamic, and when we have nothing else in from a specific item in our inventory, like if it is the amount is actually, or the actual amount is going to be 0 or zeroed out, that we know that this item is empty, and we're gonna completely delete this one from our inventory list in this case. Maybe we're gonna redesign that a bit in a moment, but for now let's write the add function. So when we are picking up an item, we want to have an add function. So basically what we take is or create is a function called of type void, since we don't return anything, and we call this one add item. In open close parentheses we want to say what kind of item do we want to pass in. So this is basically of type item, is the item to add. We can also rename, or you can name this whatever you want. And you want to add this particular item you're gonna send in when you are calling the add function of the inventory. Okay, to count up the items accordingly, we are not able to do that directly in the item itself, since we're gonna be able, or we want to make sure that only the inventory list is basically touched and counted up correctly. So what we want to go in and do is, instead of that, using the item directly inside the inventory list, we're gonna create a little function, or basically at first a class, which can hold the item data at the same time as it can count it up. So that's what we're gonna do at first. We create a new public class directly inside this inventory class, public class, and we're gonna name this one inventory item. Inventory item. In open close curly braces, we just say we want to have a type of item inside and just name it item. I believe we're gonna have to make this one public, otherwise we don't have write access. But basically we only do that directly inside here, and also later on this list might not need to stay public, so actually those two classes will be invisible no matter what, but or those list and the class. But for now, for testing out everything, I want to make sure that everything is public so we can control all that. We can also use a debug mode for this one, so there are two possibilities. So at first we're gonna have an integer which is counting up our current amount of that specific item type we want to pass in, and we want to count this up maximum to the maximum amount, of course, of 99. So what we do is, when we are calling the add item function, we're gonna pass in any item, a usual item, just the serialized scriptable object in this case. What we need to do is, at first we need to create an instance of the new class item or inventory item and put this one instead of the usual item inside the list. So otherwise we are not able to count those up. So what we do is, the list is going to get populated by inventory item instead of usual item. So we switch those two values to inventory item, which will basically still hold the item which is going to be about, but we also can count up the current amount. Maybe we're gonna later add on more stuff inside, but actually there's no need for this. Okay, so speaking of, we're gonna need to create a new instance. That's what we're gonna do before we do anything inside add item. So in that case we say inventory item, so we create a new inventory item, give it a name, maybe invent item. It's going to be equal to new inventory item. So we just create a new instance of inventory item, and now we can fill in data. And the first data, or the only data actually, is the inventory item or invent item dot. And now we can enter the item we want to pass into that inventory item is going to be equal to the item to add. So the item we're gonna pass into that function. Now what we want to do is, we want to loop through the list of inventory items now and see if there is one item already inside the list which is matching the item we are currently trying to add. Otherwise we are not able to add things up. In that case we're gonna use a for loop. There's a little trick you might already know. So when you type in for and press 2 times the tab or tabulator button on the keyboard, in Windows, I'm not sure if that is on Mac the same, you're gonna get automatically created in a for loop. The first index is going to be, or the int is going to be set to be I. If you want to change this one, you now can pass in any number, or when you press the tab once again, you're gonna be on the maximum one, which is now bluish. And what we want to do is, we want to loop through the complete inventory list. So we say, instead of max, it is going to be inventory list.count, so the maximum of that list. If you want to get rid of all that stuff in here, just press somewhere in the for loop and start to type. So in that case, what we want to check is, we want to see if the current item we are looping through is the same item as the one we want to add. So we say, if open close parentheses inventory list, since we are going through that currently, in square brackets I dot item. So we check every item which is currently inside that inventory item, basically, which is stored or again in that list. We want to check this against the item we want to add. So if that's the same, then we have a match. And when we have a match, we want to also control or actually see if the item, when we have found this inside the for loop, that the maximum amount is not reached yet. So what we say is end, which is the end operator, and if the inventory list in square brackets I dot current amount, this one inside the inventory item, this one is smaller than 99 or smaller than the maximum amount we want to have inside. Open close curly braces, and once we have found that and we are not we haven't reached the amount of 99, so we just want to make sure that we increment the amount. So item list in square brackets I dot current amount plus plus. So we increment the amount of the item we currently have in. What we also want to do is we want to return. That means we just break out of the loop and everything is done. The same thing is happening, or actually what's happening when we are not returning at that point, because we haven't found anything. We want to add a new item. In this case, we just say invent item dot, then we set the current amount to plus plus. This invent item is once again that temporary item we just create in the beginning, and we say inventory list. Now we want to add, and what do we want to add is the invent item. So the temporary one, which is holding the item data about the item we want to add, and the current amount now is going to be set to 1. Thanks for watching the tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Thumb this video up if you like it, and feel free to become my patron or donate by using PayPal to support me and my channel in the future. All links will be below in the description. See you in the next tutorial. Bye bye.